Welcome! This is Bystander X79, and today's video we're going to do a bit of a ban list wish list, alright? These are the cards that I want something done on the upcoming ban list. Konami said we won't be getting one before January. It is now January 2nd, so hopefully sometime this month we are going to see the ban list and the start of the January 2018 format. Alright? So the first card on this should be banned. Alright, this is the token that's summoned by Grinder Golem. Alright, now you're not banning the token, we're actually banning Grinder Golem. I don't have the card in my collection as vast as this is, but I digress. It's part of two problems. It's part of the loop problem that's with Akashish Magician, and it's also part of the whole token issue. Now, the OCG semi-limited this on their list. Don't know for sure if that's actually a signal, if they're going to turn around and say, do maybe a rule change and not allow tokens being used for link summoning later on this year. Usually rule changes come around March. However, if the TCG does something about it, the Grinder Golem should be banned. If it doesn't, it could be a very good signal that they actually are planning on rule changing. So, this is a card we have to watch. Personally, in my opinion, I think it should be banned if nothing is done. Alright, so I'll put this right there. Next card on the list. Spiral Quick Fix. Alright, everybody knows what this card does. Whenever it's summoned, you search your deck for a Spiral Gear card. Alright. Since this is not a hard once per turn, it's abusable with all the other effects that can summon this card from the deck or the graveyard or the hand to the field. Alright. Konami knew what was going to happen to this card when it was released. They didn't do anything about it with an errata, so they tried pushing it. They tried putting it to one. It didn't drone to one. Unfortunately, the loop still existed. It still survived. It's time to turn around and push spirals out of the metagame and let the game evolve a little bit further. So, goodbye, Quick Fix. Next card. Let's do it like this. Trickstar Reincarnation. Alright. Normal trap card, but what it does is it basically turns around and banishes your opponent's hand. And if you're playing a Trickstar deck, that usually they have to redraw a brand new hand, which means it's going to set up a whole bunch of other Trickstar effects and burn them for a lot of damage. Another thing about it is that you can also special summon another Trickstar when you banish Reincarnation from the grave. Alright. I can tell you right now that summoning effects can be applied the same turn you use it, which is really problematic. In my opinion, I think it should have been not the same turn. But in my opinion, I think, yeah, another issue is that a lot of people like to combo this with Draw and Lock. Draw and Lock Bird basically turns around, and when you chain it to this card's activation, your opponent's not going to be able to draw anything. So basically, they're going to lose their hand, not be able to draw, be put into a top deck situation, which is not a very good place to be. For both effects, this card needs to be banned. Alright, now speaking of Draw and Lock Bird, I actually put that on my limited list. It's actually one of the two very powerful hand traps in the game, the other being Maxi. I did mention that, yeah, Draw and Lock Bird, when you discard it from your hand to the graveyard, it basically shuts down a player's turn. Neither player can draw cards after it's been activated. In my opinion, yeah, giving this card the Maxi treatment, Draw and Lock Bird the Maxi treatment, is actually pretty healthy because it does add a layer of a psychological element to the game. Well, does he have Maxi? Does he have Draw and Lock Board? Am I going to be able to do what I can do for my deck this turn? Alright, makes players think a little bit, and it puts a little strategy back in the game, which this game kind of is starting to lack with a lot of the loops out there. Okay, so Draw and Lock Bird is my first card on my limited list. next card, Firewall Dragon. Yeah, I'm surprised that this card is... Don't be surprised if this card gets limited. They limited it in the OCG. The real issue is using this card in multiples, where you can actually bounce them off the field, rebuild into that one, and still keep using their effects to get stuff back from the graveyard. One copy, you can still do that stuff, but it's more like... the loop is more like a circle than actually a spiral. So you're not building into a bigger board, you're just doing the same thing over and over again, and building the same board over and over. Alright, so that's why that's at 1. Okay, next card that should be at 1. Ha! Dragonic Diagram. Diagram is actually a very splashable field spell in a lot of decks. Any deck that needs monsters of theirs to be destroyed, this card is very pro because it can set those monster effects off and help that deck get going. The other thing about it is it gives them access, those decks access to boss monsters like the True Kings or even Masterpiece, if they're able to summon them. That part alone, this card needs to go down to 1. If you think about it, dinosaurs use this card. Cosmos use this card. Six Samurais are not using this card. I've been testing this card in Yang Zing. It's extremely pro in those decks. Yeah, and the decks that I can actually get Masterpiece out of, I run it in, and it's just puts a lot more pressure on the board and your opponent for dealing with it. I think 1 would be a better number for this card, just because of what it can do. Alright. Next card, another hit against Spirals is Spiral Resort. I think leaving this card off the last list was a mistake. I get it. They wanted to push Spirals a little bit more, try to pick up more cells off of the cards. After the September list, this card was left alone. This card was what saved the loop. It single-handedly saved the loop. Searches, yeah. Monsters from a spiral monster from, spiral monster from your deck, and it basically turns around during an end phase. Shuffle 1 monster from your graveyard into your deck, so reloads. It basically reloads your deck. It allows you to search your deck once per turn, and it protects your spiral monsters from being targeted. So it's that the search effect alone, it needs to turn around and be limited to 1, just to help push spirals out of the meta. Next card that I want to see coming off the ban list is this card, Solemn Judgment. Great counter trap. It blocks a summon, it blocks a spell, it blocks a trap. Cost is half your life points. Now, a lot of players might think, oh, well, why is he bringing such a powerful card? It should be eroded. Well, let's just turn around and take a look at the game back when it was limited. Back when it was limited and moved to the ban list, we were only really maybe normal summoning once per turn, and special summoning maybe 2 or 3 times. Nowadays, we can normal summon multiple times. We can special summon a huge amount of times. So its ability to block a spell, a summon, might not be a very good idea. Might not be very good, especially if you hit the wrong thing. Its costs half your life points, and it can basically put you at a serious disadvantage if your opponent has follow-up plays. And the same thing goes with, activating spells or traps. I can attest back when this card was at 1 or more copies, it did cost me a few duels when I hit the wrong thing. So this is absolutely a skill-based card. And I also want to turn around and bring up 2 more points. The second point is Judgment does not block monster effects like Solemn Strike does. Alright, this game is a lot more monster effect heavy than when it was back limited. Alright? And the final point I want to point out is that in a couple of weeks we're going to be getting the Light Fairy structure deck. The deck is built around, utilizing a counter fairy strategy. Bringing this card back to 1 would actually help push shells. I mean, Konami has done this strategy recently to help push shells of our product. Look at Spirit Warriors. They actually brought Gateway of the Six Samurai back to 1 to give that deck a little something extra to help push the sales. All right, so I would expect this card to actually come back to 1. All right, that's my limited cards. Okay, gonna go into the semi-limits, and the semi-limits is a little bit more fun. It helps round up the game a little bit. For one thing, I'm going to be I want Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs semi-limited. The primary reason why this card isn't higher up on the list is basically because it's a hard once per turn. You can only use it once per turn. You can only block one of the things. I mean, yes, it's versatile. I'm not gonna lie, it's versatile. It can block you from adding a card from your hand, from your deck to your hand, from your deck to your graveyard, or special summoning from your deck. So it is versatile. It can block a lot. The primary reason why I'm putting it at 2 is because this card is a little bit more dangerous to rogue decks, and because of that, you want rogue decks to have a little bit more breathing room. So that's why Droll and Lockbird went to 1, and this girl will go down to 2. All right. Next card coming back that should be semi-limited is Dark Hole. I get the reason why Konami limited this card to help push the sales of Link Monsters. Link Monsters do tend to need more of an established board in order for them to really get going. The one thing about it is that without the board wipes in place, it allowed those Link loops to get really out of hand. And we had to rely a lot more on hand traps to try to get out of the situation. With this with this card coming back, going second might actually be a bad idea because we will actually have another board wipe, and that can actually punish players from overextending now. All right. To further help curb the loops and the hand trap issue as well, bring back the Dimensional Fissure to 2. Whenever monsters are sent to the graveyard, they're banished instead. So that hurts loops. They can't get a foothold on the field. One thing a lot of players forget about hand traps is that even though they might activate in the hand, their effects resolve in the graveyard. If this card's face up, you're taking the graveyard away from them, which means their effects don't resolve. A lot of players miss out on that. Okay. Another card that comes I want to come back to 2 is Torrential Tribute. Now, out of all the entry traps that we have, Bottomless Trap Hole, Solemn Warning, Compulsory Evacuation Device, Torrential Tribute. Torrential Tribute, I think, is the best one to come off the list. If you look at a lot of the Link monsters, a lot of them have over 1,500 attack points, which means having multiple Bottomless Trap Holes might not be a good idea because a lot of players are investing a lot of materials to get a Link monster out, and all of a sudden that monster is destroyed and banished. I can also turn around. It goes to say the same with Compulsory Evacuation Device. You're investing so much into getting a Link monster on the field, and all of a sudden it gets bounced. So that's the whole reason why those 2 cards I don't see coming down off the list. Solemn Warning disnegates summons or effects that summons, and that can cause a lot more issues as well. I think Torrential Tribute is a little bit better because it's a little bit more skill-based. A player that has this card set on the field is going to have to wait until their opponent actually gets through most of their summons before flipping this card over. And basically making them lose their board. It's also kind of fair because it hits both players, kind of like Dark Hole. Yeah, it's a trap, so you have to kind of go first and set it, but you know what? A lot of players don't see this card coming. I actually tested this card out in a few decks of mine back in the Zodiac formats, and I guarantee you those players did not see this card blowing their fields after I flipped it. In fact, they thought it was something like an effect negation, stuff like either Breakthrough Skill or even Phoenix Chain. Okay, last card I want to see come back to 2. Skill Drain. Skill Drain is something kind of like Solemn Judgment, where you have to pay life points to get it activated. Yeah, it's 1,000 life points, but it's a blanket effect negation. No monsters in the field can activate their effects. Yeah, and I can tell you right now, this card at 2 would actually slow the game down a little bit more. With the time, yeah, but since it's a continuous trap, yeah, you have to watch out for the timing effects because your opponent could chain quick play spells or even quick effects that can destroy this card, putting you down 1,000 life points in without the effect negation you wanted. Alright, so it does take a lot of skill to use Skill Drain, but I think it might be healthy to see this card back at 2 because we need to curb loops a little bit more. Alright, some notable cards that I also want to talk about before we go that I didn't put on the list. The first one I'm going to do is Terraforming. Now, here's the situation. If Konami doesn't do anything about the Dragon Diagram or Spiral Resort on the next list, Terraforming needs to go to 0. Alright? It's too easy enough to turn around and get field spell from your deck to your hand with this card. We want the game to slow down a bit. Hand traps aren't always going to go... Yeah, players aren't always going to use the hand traps to go after Terraforming. It's just a better idea just to put this at 0 if Konami does not do anything about the search or fill spells. Now, if they do something about it, I could see this card possibly going to 2, or maybe even 1, just to slow the game down a little bit more. And personally, I think that might help balance things out. But like I said, it all hangs on what Konami does with the search or fill spells. Alright, one last card I'm going to mention is this card, Book of Moon. Book of Moon basically is a quick play spell. Yeah, it flips a monster face down, so it blocks things like Synchro Summons, Xyz Summons, and even Link Summons. My issue with Link Summoning is that if your opponent's going for a Link 3 and you flip this card, they can just go for a Link 2. Or if they're going for a Link 2, you flip the card face down, they can go for a Link 1. I mean, it's really... And the fact that Link monsters can't go into defense modes themselves really questions whether or not this card should even come back at all. I mean, there's no point in it. Alright. And there's 2 other cards that I don't happen to have in my collection. The first card that I don't have is Phoenix Cluster Amaryllis. The primary reason why I'm including this in honorable mentions is basically because that card, depending on whether or not we get the Planet Link monster from the Link Frame set in our next core booster, which is Extreme Force, I think. Depends on whether or not that card should be hit. If we do get the Planet Link, it should be banned because that card has an FTK potential. Basically, you basically loop and build your field, loading your graveyard with at least 11 different planet monsters, including Amaryllis. The final link on your field is Topological Bomber Dragon. Use Amaryllis' effect to banish a planet from your graveyard, special summon to one of the zones that Bomber Dragon points to. Bomber Dragon's effect goes off, pops Amaryllis. Amaryllis goes to the graveyard, hits your opponent with 800, and you just keep repeating it until you burn your opponent out. The other card that is getting an honorable mention is Gem Knight Fusion. Depending on whether or not we're getting the Gem Knight Link monster, depends on whether or not that card gets banned. Some people might say, oh, it's not the end-all card, and the Gem Knights should be limited. Let's just take a look at what the what Brilliant Fusion has done. It's actually given a lot of decks access to the double summon effect of one of their Gem Knight Fusion monsters. In my opinion, this Brilliant Fusion engine is another issue that the game is facing, because there are a lot of decks that can't seem to function without having multiple engines in them. That is an issue in the game. It takes away from the overall strategy of the deck, where you have to open them with Brilliant Fusion to get the monster to get an extra normal summon during the turn, and it's just too much. I think part of that issue is possibly poor archetype design. I mean, if you look at World Chalice, they need at least 3 different engines for the deck to function perfectly, and I really don't like the whole idea of having to turn around and bring in so many different cards and taking away from the overall strategy of what should have been the best Link deck out of the gate. Outside of those comments, if you think if certain cards I mentioned should be higher up on the list or lower up on the list, please leave a comment. If you like the video, thumbs up. If you love the video, subscribe. Alright, I will be doing a video when the ban list finally does drop. So be on the lookout for that video whenever Konami decides to release the ban list. Alright? But until then, peace to all, and I'll see you in the next video.